Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, downloading, and subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this podcast, I'm going to talk about big threes. No. not Ice Cube's Big Three basketball league, but I'm going to talk about some of the greatest big threes in NBA history. My own personal top 10 big threes. And what I'm going to do is, while I won't compare the eras, because obviously players played in different eras, and there may be some big threes that I did not even see, I'll talk more about the players, their accomplishments together, and why I have them ranked where I have them ranked. And if you disagree, feel free to hit me up in the comment section. So sit back, relax. I'll drop the theme music and we'll get the podcast jumping. Let's get it. Welcome back. As I mentioned in the intro, we're talking about big threes. Now, one thing that I've found about talking about big threes in the NBA is that a lot of NBA fans, at the mere mention of big threes, they lose their mind. The haters come out, everything. And I don't think sometimes people can speak objectively because of their fandom. I've always said, like, you don't necessarily have to be a fan of a team to appreciate their greatness and what they bring to the game. And that goes for the players as well. You know, you may not be a Michael Jordan fan, you may not be a Kobe fan, you may not be a Magic Johnson fan or Larry Bird fan, but you can still appreciate their greatness and what they brought to the game. That said, the term big three probably in the last, 10, 15 years has been synonymous with, controversy, if you will, NBA finals and finals appearances and teams' legacies and dynasties and ring talk and all of this other stuff. It is the fodder that, I've always said that, like, if there's a slow sports day, slow news day in the sports world, start talking about big threes. Or you start talking about legacies, or you start talking about LeBron versus Jordan or that type of thing. So those will always spark the conversation. I welcome any conversation, and I employ anybody who listens to this podcast. If there's somebody I left out of my big three, again, now this is my personal top 10. There's no scientific study or data to back this up. This is my personal top 10. If you have an issue with it, I don't care. But I do welcome feedback. Nonetheless, I think I would venture to say that looking at this list that I have here, if you came up with your own big three, I think most of these teams would, and these players would fall on your list somewhere. Now, we all may not agree as to where you would put them, but I think they should be on most lists. So I feel pretty confident in that. So again, I welcome all feedback. I don't care if you disagree, but I welcome all feedback. And again, this is not based on, who had the most rings or who had the most all-star games or anything like that. So I'm going to start off with number 10. Bill Russell, Bob Cousy, and Tom Heinsohn from the Boston Celtics. Now, this, I guess you could really say that this was the original Big Three. Together, Russell, Cousy, and Heinsohn, they were dominant. They were a dominant trio in the 60s. They won 6 championships in 7 years. Honestly, I could have them ranked at number 1. They're going to come in at number 10 on my list. But they were, if we're being honest, they were surrounded by several other skilled players. And also they were in a league with lesser team and far less talent. So should that be a knock on them? It probably shouldn't, but I can't, especially not having seen them. This team dominated in the 60s. I wasn't around. I wasn't around in the 60s. I'm old. I ain't that old. But yeah, still nonetheless. And obviously Bill Russell is by far one of the greatest, arguably, some will say Bill Russell's the greatest, NBA player of all time. 11 championships. You can't argue with 11 championships. I don't care how many teams they were playing against. He still has 11 rings. He was so not only great on the court, but he was great off the court with his social activism in the face of bigotry in Boston and across this country. So, salute to Bill Russell. He is the epitome of, a true man. So I there's no disrespect at all by putting them at 10. Honestly, I did not see them. So most of what I know is from film and just history and historical standpoint. And then also talking to my father who watched them. But again, 6 championships in 7 years, can't beat that. All 3 of them are Hall of Famers. Again, Bill Russell, arguably the greatest NBA player of all time. They come in at number 10. Number 9. The Boston Celtics own Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen. This collection of 3 from the late 2000s, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the first time that I had ever heard of a group referred to as a Big Three. And I think the reason behind that is, and again, there were, and you'll see from this list, there were other Big Threes that came before them. But I think part of the reason why people refer to them as a Big Three is because, unlike the team that I just mentioned with Russell, Cousy, and Tom Heinsohn, those guys were drafted together. So they were drafted by the Celtics and they came up with the Celtics and they stayed with the Celtics for most of their careers, if not all. Wherein Paul Pierce was drafted by the Celtics and was a Celtic for life. He played with other teams, but he'll always be known as a Celtic. But he was drafted by the Celtics. And then Kevin Garnett came via trade. And Ray Allen, I think, came via trade as well, if I'm not mistaken. So they weren't homegrown talent, if you will. And I think that's why people started referring to them as a Big Three, not only because they were 3, talented players, but, it wasn't homegrown. And, that's why people kind of started referring to them like that. I think, I'm not sure. But other than that, they were a phenomenal talent. I think this collection of Big Three, even though they may have been the first ones to quote unquote form a Big Three or form a quote unquote super team, because that word gets thrown around a lot nowadays too, the super team. Yeah, man. In the late 2000s, they were tough. Paul Pierce at small forward, Kevin Garnett at center, Ray Allen at shooting guard. It was really on a night-to-night basis, pick your poison. Paul Pierce, a.k.a. the truth. You couldn't stop him. He had the mid-range game. Kevin Garnett, would kill you on the defensive end, and then he was in his prime. He was unstoppable. Back to the basket, big man that could step out, shoot the jumper. Ray Allen, one of the greatest three-point shooters that the NBA has ever seen. They were able to put it all together and defeat a Kobe Bryant-led NBA team in the NBA Finals. And then they got back to the finals, I think it was 2 years later, and forced them to 7 games. So, I think this was an incredible big three. As much as I hate the Celtics, I enjoy watching them play together, man. They really, really shined, the three of them. I think the only thing that really didn't work in their favor was that they weren't, at the time that they formed, they were on the downside of their careers as far as, I think Kevin Garnett might have been on the back end of his prime, but he was still great. And I think what they were able to do was they were able to come together, and they didn't have to have, monster performances by, any particular individual. But, on a given night, Ray Allen could fill it up and drop 35 on you. Same for KG, and same for Paul Pierce. So you just never knew what, one of the three. I guess the best way I can describe it, you wanted to try to contain at least two of the big three, but you knew on a night-to-night basis you were going to get 30 plus points, from one of them. And God forbid there was a night where the three of them went off. You were really, at that particular time in the NBA, you were at their mercy. But great team nonetheless. Again, one championship, but a great championship nonetheless. They come in at number 9 for me. Number 8, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Kevin Love, Kyrie Irving, and LeBron James. This big three, man, I think, wow, it's really kind of unfortunate that I have them at 8 for them. But I think you could make a case that you could move them higher. You can make a case that you could actually move them a little lower. This was actually LeBron's, return home. And, Cleveland, it's funny to me when I look at this particular big three, and I think about Cleveland, the Cleveland Cavaliers as a whole, before LeBron came back. Well, actually, before LeBron even got there. And I've said this before on previous podcasts, and I've said it before on the Dead End Sports podcast. I've been watching the NBA since 1980, and the Cleveland Cavaliers sucked for most of my life. So, prior to LeBron getting there, they weren't relevant. They had a couple of good years here and there. They challenged the Bulls a couple of times, but, they weren't a threat to anybody. And so really to see them put it together with LeBron, Kyrie was there. And LeBron obviously leaves Miami, comes back home to Cleveland, and then they acquire Kevin Love via trade. And, that version of the big three, man, was incredible. They weren't together, relatively speaking, as long probably as they would have liked, obviously, because, subsequently Kyrie left and, then LeBron left again. But, if for nothing else, they brought a championship to Cleveland, and that will never, you can't ever underscore that. And in doing that, they beat a team that was a juggernaut that had them down 3-1. This team was, had won 73 games that particular season, an NBA record. And so, there was a lot of drama. There was a lot of, stuff that surrounded this. A lot of, I don't want to say drama, maybe some, I don't know. To be honest, I don't really know how to put it because we don't know what the dynamic was between LeBron and Kyrie. They competed, and I think if they had stuck together, who knows, they would have probably won more. But I mean, getting to the finals, they got to the finals twice, and then they again beat the juggernaut, the Golden State Warriors. So. And I think with the first finals that they got to, that they lost, they lost Love and they lost obviously Kyrie after game 1. So you never know how that series would have gone. But obviously, when you think about that particular big three, the key component is LeBron James. I mean, LeBron James arguably is the greatest player. I think he's the greatest player of his generation. You could make a case, and some have made the case that he's the greatest player to ever play. I ain't going that far, but he's right there. But yeah, it's phenomenal, and what they were able to accomplish. I think coming back from being down 3-1 and winning that title, I think that just speaks volumes, to LeBron. And I mean, obviously, LeBron put the team on his back, and Kyrie hit the game-winning shot in Game 7 on the road. I mean, you can't ask for much more, and they took out the juggernaut. So, love them or hate them, man. They're right there at number 8. Number 7, San Antonio Spurs, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Tim Duncan. Yeah, man. I know when I said San Antonio Spurs, most of you probably just kind of yawned. Yeah. The Spurs, not exciting. You don't see a lot of alley-oops. You don't see a lot of crossovers. You don't see a lot of three-pointers in your face. You don't see any shimmying. You don't see any dancing or talking trash. You just see pick and roll. You see Manu Ginobili always going left. I don't think Ginobili ever went right. He may have gone right to the basket 5 times in his career, and everybody always let him go left. Tony Parker doing his thing, and of course Tim Duncan shooting the the bank shots off the glass, big fundamentals, as Shaq would call them. I think it goes without saying that this is the most boring big three that's on this list. Nonetheless, they were successful, man. They were a well-oiled machine led by Greg Popovich. Pop arguably is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, NBA coach of all time. Some will put him up there. But yeah, man, I mean, first and foremost, there was the thing that I think you have to respect about San Antonio is that for the longest time, there was a knock on the NBA was that the NBA did not want to see small market teams win. And, I remember Ray Allen in Milwaukee, I think in early 2000s when he was playing with Milwaukee, he even mentioned the fact that he alluded to the fact that he thought the NBA was conspiring to keep small market teams out of their finals. And at that particular time, he was playing for a small market team in Milwaukee. But the Spurs did it, man. They put San Antonio on the basketball map. This particular big three, they won 5 championships and 6 finals appearances. And I mean, to be honest, they were a threat year in and year out. I think this team, these Duncan-led teams, they must have won 50 games 14, 15 years in a row. I mean, the Spurs, man, they weren't going anywhere. And they were there, up until the time that Duncan retired a few years ago at the time of this recording. But, it wasn't flashy, but they flat out got it done. And, Tim Duncan obviously is a certified Hall of Famer. Manu Ginobili, I'm pretty sure, will go into the Hall of Fame. I would not be surprised if Tony Parker makes it to the Hall of Fame. But, the staple of success. And they were consistent. And I think they were probably as close to what you would see from a big three that you would see probably in the early 80s and 90s when it wasn't free agency like that, where players weren't jumping around from team to team. So, like them or hate them, you gotta give them their respect because they got it done. And again, they were consistent, and I don't think that should ever go unrecognized. So, shout out to the Spurs, Big Three, coming in at number 7. Number 6, Miami Heat, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James. This is probably the most talked about, maybe the most polarizing big three on the list. You may or may not disagree, but this big three was special, man. I mean, I think one thing that people tend to forget, just from a financial standpoint, they all took less money to make this happen. While I remember people being extremely upset with, LeBron leaving, not just leaving Cleveland the way that he left Cleveland via the quote unquote the decision. But I remember people being upset with LeBron, saying that he should not have left his team to go play with other players. Sound familiar? But in his defense, LeBron was a free agent. And while you may not, and I said this at the time, I said it on Dead End Sports, while you may not like his decision, he was a free agent. Now, the thing that made it that much different from other times is that we had never seen a free agent of this magnitude, the best player in the game, leave his team to go play somewhere else and to team up with other stars to create a big three or a super team. Nonetheless, the scrutiny was there. They come out to this, pep rally, I guess, at their arena, introducing the three of them. And, LeBron says they're not going to win 2 or 3 championships. They're going to win 4, not 5, not 6, he's going on and on. We remember it. But love him or hate him, this team was must see TV. Anytime the Heat were on TV, it was box office. The ratings were through the roof. It was good for the NBA. LeBron took his talents to South Beach. And, who wouldn't want to be in Miami as opposed to Cleveland? There's no knock on Cleveland, but hey, Miami's warm year round. It's a beautiful place. But, the scrutiny was there. And this team, this big three, made it to it was 4 finals, and they won 2, and they almost came up on the short end of the stick had it not been for a corner 3 ball from Ray Allen against the Spurs in the finals. They would have been 1-3, excuse me. But they finished 2-2 as far as finals records and appearances. But every year that they were together, they made the finals. So that was 4 years. So you can't knock that. Winning 2 championships. LeBron wins his first championship. And again, that's nothing to sneeze at. That was a great time for the league, a great time for LeBron. And it set him, apart from everybody else because, at that particular time, that was a knock that, was LeBron going to make it to the finals and win? He had made it to the finals, but was he ever going to win a ring? It's kind of interesting though, looking back on it. I think me and tons of other fans of the NBA would have loved to have seen a LeBron Kobe final. We never got that, and that's a little disappointing. But nevertheless, man, I think you've got 3 Hall of Famers here. Some people kind of question Bosh, but I think Bosh was an all-star before he got to Miami. Obviously, he was an all-star once they teamed up. And, Bosh, he held his own even after LeBron left. So, he probably would still be doing this thing had he not, had health issues. And he still hasn't, at the time of this recording, still has not officially, quote unquote, retired. So Wade, he did his thing. Wade won before LeBron got there, perennial all-star, Olympian, the whole nine. His place is solidified. These 3 are from, the famous 2003 NBA draft. And, LeBron is obviously, one of the greatest ever. So position is solidified. And I have them at number 6. Number 5, Golden State Warriors, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry. This was the first big 3 in Golden State. And these 3 meshed perfectly. They were something else to watch. And I think had they not choked away a 3-1 lead, they'd probably be higher on my list. But Curry and Thompson, the Splash Brothers, they set 3-point records. Draymond Green made himself, and I remember seeing Draymond Green when he was in college at Michigan State. If you had told me then that he would be this kind of player, I would have told you that you were crazy. Obviously things start with him on the defensive end, but, they introduced the idea of small ball, going small in that death lineup. And again, they were able to make it to the finals, and win and defeat Cleveland. And then the next year they went 73-9, setting an NBA regular season record for wins. So they had the best record in the NBA twice, 2 finals appearances, and 1 championship. It would have been perfect for them had they won after being up 3-1. But Draymond punches, LeBron in the nuts. He gets suspended. Cleveland comes back. They win. And then you go to game 7. And Golden State went lemon booty. And Cleveland took the title. And you cannot knock the Cavs for that. They took the title on the strength of LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love. And so, again, this big 3 for the Golden State Warriors, I can't knock them. And one of the things that people lose sight of, and I always bring this up when people start talking about Golden State, when you look at Steph Curry, when you look at Klay Thompson, when you look at Draymond Green, the 3 of them have something in common. They were all drafted by the Golden State Warriors. So this is homegrown talent. And I think that goes a long way because that gets lost, but I don't know that that's going to happen, or we will see this type of talent drafted and retained in a while. We saw OKC draft Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, and James Harden, but they couldn't keep it together. And ironically, all 3 of them went on to win MVP. But that's beside the point. But these 3 were drafted by the Warriors. And so I remember back then when they were on the rise, people talked about them as a big 3 and as a super team. But I didn't really consider them to be a super team because they were all drafted by the same team at this particular time. No, they weren't a super team at all. So yeah, man, number 5, and they could have been higher if they didn't choke away a 3-1 lead. Number 5, Golden State Warriors. Number 4, Boston Celtics. Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Larry Joe Bird. Man, listen. If you want to talk about a Mount Rushmore of big threes, as far as front courts, I mean, that's the Mount Rushmore right there. There might not have been a better front court in the history of the NBA. These three were incredible. They did it in such a way that it was so. If you weren't a Celtics fan, it was frustrating because you knew you couldn't beat them. I mean, like, you just knew you couldn't beat them. Unless you were maybe the Lakers, maybe the Sixers, but on a night-to-night basis, you couldn't beat the Celtics because they were going to rip your heart out, throw it on the ground, stomp on it, and kick it in the stands. And they didn't care. They weren't, I mean, like, they were just so much. You couldn't deal with Robert Parrish on the block. He was physical. He would block shots. And, you know, if he didn't like you, he would karate chop you in your throat. Shout out to Bill Laimbeer. Kevin McHale had some of the sweetest post moves you would ever see in your entire life. And Larry Bird is one of the greatest small forwards, one of the greatest players to ever play the game. He's in my top 10, right? So you couldn't do anything with him, man. I mean, like, on a night-to-night basis, you would think you could be up by 15, and here they come. Here they come. And Bird would be passing, he'd be shooting, he'd be talking trash, and there was nothing that you could do. McHale in the post, Parrish controlled the paint. There was literally nothing that you could do. And you could see them rip the heart out of most teams most nights. The only team that I saw them play that really wasn't afraid of them, well, actually, but two, the Sixers in the 80s and the 80s, obviously, Showtime Lakers, they weren't afraid. Even those Pistons teams that came and got them like later in the 80s, you know, the bad boys, they had to get through Boston. And finally, once they got over the hump, they weren't afraid. But initially, they were afraid. I mean, because you just knew. And going to Boston, trying to get a win? Shit, that ain't happening. The leprechaun was real. So, yeah, man. They had, they won titles. And they played against some of the greatest competition in the NBA history. So I've got them at number 4. Number 3, Golden State Warriors. Klay Thompson, Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant. It's still early, right? But if they can stay together, this big three could move from 3-1. All of them, future Hall of Famers. Arguably the greatest shooter, definitely the greatest 3-point shooter I've ever seen. And Klay is probably in the top 5 as far as 3-point shooting that I've ever seen. And Kevin Durant currently is the second best player in the game, right behind LeBron. I don't know what to say about this. I mean, like, it's scary offensively what they do. And they really don't get a lot of credit for what they do defensively, because adding Kevin Durant, they've become even better defensively. Steph Curry's still a liability on defense, but he's doing better. But this team, man, the way that you stop these three is that you have to dismantle them. If they financially commit to this team, the Warriors, and the Warriors financially commit to them, it's going to be hard for them to be beaten. And you all know what happened. I mean, the aforementioned 73-win season, they go to the finals. They run into LeBron. They're up 3-1 over the Cavs, and they go lemon booty. And so the following summer, they say, okay, hey, we're going to go and recruit Kevin Durant. Now, a lot of people have a problem with the fact that Kevin Durant had a 3-1 lead on that particular Warriors team, and he decided to join them. But like it or not, like I said about LeBron, he was a free agent. You may not like the move, but he was a free agent. I get it. Would I have done it? Hell no. But at the same time, if Kevin Durant never wins a ring, we'd probably clown him like we clown Carmelo. But that's beside the point. Nonetheless, man, this team, the word gets thrown around, super team. And you can't ignore it, but the facts are the facts. This team is, 32-6 in the postseason with 2 NBA championships in 9 finals games. I mean, Kevin Durant has been the difference. He has really been the difference. This version of their big three, and now notice we had to push Draymond out of this big three because he's not in it. It's Durant, it's Curry, and it's Klay Thompson. And at the time of this recording, we don't know what's going to happen as far as, how they're going to do it financially. But, if they keep these 3 together, I don't know, man. I mean, barring injury, and again, I know what you're thinking. This big 3 has only been together 2 years. But I have to put them higher because look at what they've done. They've destroyed the competition. I mean, let's just keep it a buck. They've destroyed the competition. Again, 32-6 in the postseason, 2 NBA championships, 9 finals games. That's it. That's it. So I don't know, man. It's going to be tough. Barring injury, barring, somebody deciding to, sell drugs or fight dogs. This big 3, man, it's going to be tough for you to supplant them. I got them at number 3. Number 2, Chicago Bulls. Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. Man, this big 3 was incredible. I think if they had played together longer, Chicago definitely would have won more than 6 rings. Keep in mind, this particular big 3 only played together for 3 years, but they won 3 titles back to back to back, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. The trio of Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman, I mean, let's just keep it real. They featured arguably the greatest player of all time, arguably the greatest rebounder of all time, and arguably the greatest sidekick of all time. And I don't mean that as a diss. I mean it in all respect to Scottie Pippen, because you could make a case that during that time, Scottie Pippen was not only was he the ultimate sidekick, but he was like maybe the second or third best player in the NBA. And all 3 of them in the 95-96 season made the all-defensive team. And that's where people don't understand. That's where they took their pride in, defense, because the defense would always turn to offense. Phil would just let them loose. He would just let them loose. And I mean, like, there was literally nothing that you could do with Rodman. Rodman could go out, party all night, get drunk, get high, whatever he was doing, put on a dress, and he was coming to the arena the next night to kick your ass. And that's what he did. And you couldn't stop this team. You couldn't stop them. And unfortunately, the only thing that stopped them was Jordan retiring. That's it. If Jordan doesn't retire, if they don't get, not re-sign Phil, who knows? Who knows? We'll never know. But I tell you what, man, when you talk about a cold team, this team was cold as ice. This big three right here, you can put them in any era, they would hold their own. I got them at number 2. Coming in at number 1, James Worthy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Earvin Magic Johnson. Showtime Lakers, man. This collection of big three, I think, if you weren't around to see the Showtime Lakers, you just missed it. It's really hard for me to put into words what you missed, but you just really, really missed it. They had Magic there. They bring in Kareem. I mean, they had Kareem there. They draft Magic. They bring in James Worthy, and they really became the gold standard for big threes for nearly 3 decades. This is the standard. They were dominant. They were unstoppable. They ran the floor. They played well and they meshed well together. They played together for 7 seasons. They made the finals 6 times in those 7 seasons, and they won three rings. Magic Johnson, what can I say about Magic? He is, in my opinion, second greatest player in the game, to play the game. And I say that with all due respect. I mean, Magic was just so phenomenal, man. I mean, he was just so cold. You can make a case, even if you don't have Magic that high, if you got Magic in your top 5, Kareem, the all-time scorer. He had the shot that nobody could block, the sky hook. A lot of people hold Kareem as the greatest NBA player to ever play the game. Then you had big game James Worthy, who lived up to the name. He was big game. I mean, you really could not do anything with him. 15, 18 feet, moves around the basket, everything. And again, unless you were a Celtics fan, Showtime Lakers were fun to watch, man. And this big three, again, they set the standard. So yeah, there you have it. That is my top 10 big threes of all time. Hit me up in the comments section. Let me know what yours are. That's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm your boy 12 Kyle. We'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's.